Alright guys, TacticalRab again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. What a day of matches to close out this final weekend. Vegas Legion, big talking point over the last couple of days. Taking down OpTic last weekend, taking down Subliners earlier this weekend, but OpTic Texas, they wanted to put that behind them, talking about the server cheat and all this. Today, they played the Minnesota Rocker, another team that desperately needs every 10 points they can find. But this season, we have not had many teams take down the top 4, but all of a sudden here in Major 4, it's happening all the time. What is going on? What was this collapse from OpTic? What about the Black Ops 6 reveal as well that arrived this afternoon? Very much on Twitter, your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. We have a lot to discuss. Black Ops 6 will release October the 25th. Earlier often than is usually the case lately, which I think is a good thing. The game is clearly pretty polished. It's clearly pretty ready. This was maybe the same date that Black Ops 4 came out. Late October is good. It means the off-season's going to be better. Champs happens in July. A month after is the Esports World Cup. Then there's like effectively a month and a half until the new game launches after that. This is just an early look at things. I'm sure that you guys have seen a fair bit of it. I'm sure we're going to talk about some further reaction to this as well tomorrow as well, because there's just a lot to say on early Black Ops 6 gameplay, what it's looking like. This initially looked a bit like Pick 10, but if you look closer, you can quite clearly see that Gunsmith is still here. It's unfortunate from the competitive side, but we know what they're doing nowadays on the Warzone angle. They want to ensure that that is maintained. So unfortunately, Pick 10 is not going to happen. There will be something, I wouldn't say equating Pick 10, but something slightly more Black Ops Cold War-esque maybe, where it's a little bit different. And, well, as we see multiplayer return to 3-lane maps, I mean, they always talk about this. And to be fair, the last couple of years, we've kind of got there a little bit with some of these developers. 12 new maps are launched, and then 4 what they call strike maps. They had these in Black Ops Cold War, right? Crossroads, Strike, and all this. And some of those are actually really good for competitive play. So that's happening. That's pretty exciting stuff. No Pick 10 for multiplayer. It's going to look like this. Primary, secondary, dedicated melee weapon, and all this stuff. But of course, yeah, Gunsmith is not going away, unfortunately. This was probably the big talking point of the day on the Black Ops 6 reveals, was this, what they call omni movement, or omnidirectional movement, or whatever, which basically allows players to spring and dive in any direction, enhance ground movement. We can see some examples here. Immediately you see these, you think, wow, Shotzzy's going to absolutely love it. But I mean, look at some of these examples, right? It's very interesting, isn't it? Now, the interesting thing, I guess, is as well, you can choose whether you enable or disable this. Also worth noting in this final frame here, we can clearly see what looks to be an AK-74U. So that's going to be back in the game. Actually, Gwyn even mentions it. 74U, yeah, we are back. So that's something to look at. You can disable this omnidirectional movement thing. So the pros may decide, you know what, we're just going to GA it. Like, it ain't happening, boys. We're not using it. So that, of course, will be determined, I suppose, when the game launches. But I can imagine that some teams will probably not to be happy with this type of stuff. I think it looks kind of fun. I think it's probably going to add a skill gap, but we know what the pros sometimes think about things that actually add a skill gap to the game. And as Scump says, the boys are in for a good time, Shotzzy and Pred, because Shotzzy can be diving around, and then Pred can be laying on the floor, while turning around, right? Because, you know, lay G and all this, whatever they want to call him. But plenty to say on OpTic, of course, in a couple of seconds as well. Slasher, obviously looking forward to it. Finally, another Trek year coming up, he says. Black Ops 6, though, Parasite says, will be great until things start to go downhill after a few months. And you might think from Parasite here, oh, this is all doom and gloom, but I kind of get it from his point of view, right? We've seen many Call of Duty games at this point that they start strong and then they start to regress, right? Never adding new guns, rarely adding maps into the competitive map pool. Ranked will get taken over by hackers, 8 will be dead within 5 months. So, you know, I get it from his point of view, but generally I'm more optimistic here than I have been about a Call of Duty game in a bit of time, just because I've heard so many great things about this game over the last 6 months or so, probably. Many people say that it's really polished. Trek are back. They seem to be delivering a good thing. And look, there are going to be problems. It's COD at the end of the day, but generally some optimism coming out of today from the pros as well, as we'll get into tomorrow. But we've got some matches to talk about. We got FaZe Gorillas. As expected, not especially interesting. I think Gorillas might be the team that's been 3-0 swept the most times in CDL history. To be fair, that may well be Legion. FaZe are certainly the team with the most 3-0s, and they deliver another one here. They won a sub base as well, so congratulations to FaZe. They are really trying to play this in the map pool, and I mentioned this now going into Major 3, that I thought it was certainly something that they would consider trying to add into the pool, because if you're FaZe, you want to get good at everything if you can. You know that OpTic like this map, you know that Toronto like this map. So if FaZe can, let's say they make the grand finals at champs, but they're coming from losers, and they don't get control of the map pool as a result, they may have to play a sub-base, and they will need to be good at it against those top teams. So that's why they're continuing to play it. They do win this one. It was close. It was far from easy. They do win this one. They win the search, and they demolish them in the control. Cellium was 15-1. I think he finished 19-6, but that was quickly GG. And obviously, FaZe have got something prepared here for Los Angeles Gorillas. aBeZy was actually on Gorillas. Formal has been talking about a potential return. We'll discuss that tomorrow. Jimbo, of course, was hacking, and then they need support from, you know, the Divine himself, apparently, if they're going to do anything here. A relatively swift 3-0 for FaZe. They get the points on the board. Gorillas continue to somewhat flounder, and it's got to be said for Gorillas, comparing their situation to some of the teams around them. We've got Ravens getting a win yesterday. We've got Minnesota Rocker we're going to discuss in a second. We've got the Vegas Legion obviously putting wins together and stringing them together at that. Gorillas needed probably another upset victory here, but the reality was it wasn't going to happen, and yeah, Flames had a particularly rough one. The next series was relatively rapid fire as well. Miami Heretics played Toronto Ultra, went about as we might have expected. Envoy actually took over the 6-star. Still for Envoy, there is quite a lot of inconsistency, I would say, in his gameplay. He's not always there every single map. Sometimes he's on, sometimes he's off. We've seen that, and maybe it's expected in the role that he plays, but I think Envoy just needs to level up a little bit more if they want to be consistently fighting for championship victories, because he has great maps like this, but then later in the series, you know, there's maps that aren't going so well, especially in the control, actually, although they did go on to win it. The Search and Destroy, though, they lose another Karachi, and this, I think, is going to be something of a point of concern for Ultra, because they were so good at this map at the start of the season. They would just win this there would be 6-0 teams on Karachi Search. But over the last couple of months, that story has now changed. MettalZ gets a big 1-2 here, and actually Miami run away with this very comfortably indeed. The control, that went the way of Ultra. It was again a round 5 here, but as we can see, Envoy 16-28, Scrappy's 34-23 went on a big spree as well to close out the game, and then it was all over. Actually, no, it was the hard point who went on a big spree. I think he went on a 10 streak towards the end of this Karachi hard point. Inside our 2 minutes 20 in the hill, Scrappy took over, and that was job done. So Miami, their streak comes to a close. Again, though, good search and destroy play, and that will stand them in good stead. Like, they are legit a Neslo threat right now, Miami, but starting the way they have 2-2, that's fine. They can work from there, and I'm sure that they will, and still the World Championship seems on the table. But man, the final result we're going to talk about today has such major implications, because this morning I was pretty convinced that Boston aren't making it, Gorillas aren't making it, I don't think Minnesota Rockers making it. I probably still don't, but wow, today was important. Scrappy ends with a 1.24. It is business as usual. But this was the series that I was interested to see. OpTic Texas played Vegas Legion last weekend. They lost in 5. It was a close series. They didn't play their best stuff, but obviously there was the whole, you know, Virginia server cheese and all this type of stuff. So here we go again. Today they play the Minnesota Rocker. Now, of course, you've always got to weigh up the fact that it's not like OpTic needs to win this series. They're going to make it more than likely to the winner's bracket anyway. But these series are still somewhat important, right? Because every 10 points you get you a better seed potentially for the World Championship, right? They're not far off FaZe's point standings. They're also not far off Toronto Ultras. If you're first seed, you play the 8th seed at the World Championship, which is likely to be, you know, a team like a Ravens or a Vegas or something in that ballpark. Whereas if you're, like, say, like 3rd seed, then you're playing maybe a Surge or a Thieves round 1, which is probably less optimal. Probably still fine. The top 4 should still handle business on LAN. But you really do want to secure the best seed possible. And of course, for OpTic, this was a chance to break FaZe's records. At least, you know, the fact that they've been number 1 in the standings every single year. This was a year that potentially OpTic could have done that. Still possible, of course. But today makes that less likely. So obviously, OpTic aren't going to go in with the same fire that Rocker are, because Rocker need every point they can get. So there is that caveat to draw. And after a relatively slow start to the game 1, OpTic just turned it around massively and they win the game 1, right? So slow starts, that can happen when, you know, the other team comes out on a heater, you're coming out slow. But of course, it was from this point to the end of the series where the questions were raised, because against Minnesota Rocker, their search and destroy has been somewhat suspect lately. They bounce back and win the search. They go to an invasion control, and on this one, OpTic get the job done. They probably will feel OpTic they should have won this in 4 rounds. They could have won the final offense. They didn't. It went to a round 5. They got the job done. So, you know, it's all looking good. Accuracy gets spun on here by Shotzzy. Business as usual. What I will say is that Gunless played impressively today. It was a big talking point of this team when they were forming, when Gunless came in. are we ever going to get that Infinite Warfare Gunless, that Black Ops 4 Gunless, you know, World War II Gunless, absolute prime player that was taken over the league? We haven't really seen that version of him for several years at this point, and there were serious questions whether we'd ever see him again. But that's exactly what we saw, at least in this series, right? And it gets them over the line. This team clearly has talent and potential, but I've just not been convinced, and for good reason, by the Minnesota Rocker. I think this was more of OpTic just not playing especially well. This Vista was just straight up bad. Like, they should no way be getting slammed here by the Minnesota Rocker on Vista. Gunless obviously came to play, but Kenny was double negative. Like, you're not going to see that very often at all. Pred as well had a really hard time here. As I say, Gunless and Lins, they both took over the game, as did Standy. Accuracy held his own, and that forced a game 5. But in the game 5, it's like, okay, whatever, we're going to lose some hard points. It's online cheese, it is what it is. But we go to a Karachi Search and Destroy. A great map for OpTic. They go up 5-2. They're playing well, no problem at all. But we've seen this before from OpTic, and, you know, we've seen this even earlier this season with OpTic, right? And it was a question that I had when Kenny joins. Would these instances be resolved? And I obviously think that Kenny's been massively influential for this team. They won the most recent event, right? And without Kenny, I don't think that happens. But this team is still vulnerable to moments like this, that maybe, you know, maybe they're more vulnerable to this type of stuff than other teams, because, you know, we've seen this before a couple of years ago, reminded some of the Cold War Rocker versus OpTic series, of course, when the We Are Witnessing a Breakdown thing first came to fruition, and it kind of happened again here. Down 5-2 the Minnesota Rocker, they bring it back to 5-5, and they get the win 6-5 in the end. And, I mean, I couldn't really believe my eyes when I was watching this, because, again, even the final round was a defense, right? They could have held the line, but they didn't. They got picked 1 by 1. Clearly, OpTic were kind of losing the plot at this point. Pred had a pretty rough final map as well, which is interesting to note. A Minnesota Rocker bring it back in an unbelievable fashion and win the series. And as Kenny immediately afterwards says, actually a joke of a performance, GG's Minnesota, right? Because we saw the other day the conversation about the servers and all this type of stuff, but that isn't really going to fly in this one. They are clearly not playing the level of Call of Duty that they need to be playing if they want to continue the success they had on the major. It's not a bad time to have a bit of a slump, right? Lose a couple of series here, regain, put in the more time, and, you know, we always talk about it. A team wins an event. Is there going to be some complacency setting in? Are they going to be able to replicate that kind of level again in the near future? It's difficult to maintain. That's why it's so tricky to go back to back or to continue a dominant online streak. Obviously, these other teams are going super hard. OpTic might not be going so hard right now because they don't need the points, but they need to try and stay on top of their game because FaZe are going hard, Toronto are going hard, and as Dashy says, yeah, GG's Minnesota lost 2-3. So it's not like it's the end of the world, but it's still very interesting. What caused a bit of drama, though, was the fact that the COD League decided to jump in on the bandwagon here. This is really interesting to me, right? Because the COD League did that tweet the other day where they were like, oh, MVP Shotzzy with a 0.45 KD, and that was a bit like, why Shotzzy with nobody else? And now here they are when OpTic lose, and they bring up, of course, the classic Rocker versus Chicago accuracy, 3-piece, 1 versus 3, madness on that Moscow Search and Destroy, and then, you know, the We Are Witnessing a Breakdown thing comes through. So, you know, I don't exactly know why they tweeted this, but to be fair, it was in some sense reminiscent, and of course, accuracy and Standy still on that team to the present day. Now, Blake actually had this to say. I'm not exactly sure whether he's trolling or he's being serious, but he says, guys, we had to switch the internet lines because the watch party was lagging. Relax. Tough to get a win on Wi-Fi even against a team like Rocker. So not exactly sure what to make of this, but whatever. Thought I'd just throw it out there for you guys, but I don't think the OpTic guys are going to be tweeting anything like this because, you know, they don't want it to feel like excuses, right? So, yeah, here's OpTic Texas going down 2-3, and they now start the stage 1-2. And what an incredibly big win for Minnesota Rocker. That now puts them at like 140. And, you know, they're 2-2 so far this stage. But the search and destroy for OpTic that was so critical for them making the run back at the major, they've lost 2 searches, both in round 11 here to Minnesota Rocker today, and they will certainly want to have a couple of these back. So, big talking point on OpTic this week. In the long term, this might turn out to be a good thing, because they really can put their head down again. Of course, it's always difficult to maintain this kind of level, but wow, big one for Minnesota. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.